total number of estimates were 5 million barrels, which is about 200 million gallons.
In a 1 to 10 scale, how would you rate this accident?
Oh, it's definitely a 10. Because of the environmental effects, because of the deaths that occurred, because of the effects on the economy of much of the Gulf Coast of the United States, and actually because of the impact on the oil industry worldwide.
The fact that this was offshore and at such a great depth meant that we had to deal with extra concerns in terms of temperature, the very cold temperatures of the deep ocean, as well as pressure, the very great pressure of working at the deep ocean. And so the mechanical response was much different than it was, for instance, with the Exxon Valdez.
The biggest question probably is, where did all of the oil ultimately go?
If there is a spill, what are we going to do?
And how do you prepare yourself for that?
You have got to have good scientific baselines.
First thing I would do is I'd make sure that the person in charge is totally independent.
You had a variety of players in the oil industry that were not adequately addressing issues of risk.
The other piece of advice is to be prepared, better prepared ahead of time.
Many of the people who were working on the Deepwater Horizon rig did not react according to those plans that had been laid ahead of time.
The major mistakes included a use of a cementing material to cement the bottom of the well, which is a special formulation that was not adequately tested. Once that was put in place, there was a test made to make sure that that cement had sealed the bottom of the well. That test failed repeatedly, but they went ahead and assumed that it was okay. And then thirdly, they removed a lot of the drilling mud in this well, which is actually necessary to keep the pressure down the well. So once they removed that, there was an imbalance of the well, and it broke out of the bottom. It shot right to the top, up through the riser, onto the drilling rig, and onto the floor. This tremendous burst of gas which exploded.
Especially in Louisiana, there are some spots where there's oil still being cleaned up. There's still some stuff that is washing ashore in terms of tar balls as far east as the Gulf Coast of Florida. But more importantly, there are real serious economic effects on a variety of different industries, including tourism and the fishing industry and the oil industry itself.
Although most of the seafood is back in business and they're catching shrimp and oysters and whatnot, the stigma attached with it means that people don't want to eat seafood coming from the Gulf of Mexico. They think it's contaminated or unsafe for some reason.
It is going to take 5 years, 10 years, maybe even 20 years before we have really seen the biological impacts of this spill.
Well, what's the worst contamination, by oil or by dispersants?
What's the worst contamination? We don't know.
Was there contamination from the drilling muds? Was there contamination from the dispersant? Are there other contaminants in the oil that are not naturally there that these organisms can't deal with?
The contaminant can be absorbed by the fish, it can be ingested when the fish eats food, and it can delay or it can impact the reproduction of the fish.
When do you think we're going to have greener dispersants in the market available for a situation like this that happened here in the United States?
It could be anywhere from, say, 1 to 5 years, depending upon how much one wants.
Already the Department of the Interior, the federal agency which regulates this industry, has put in place a number of new requirements and regulations that requires them to review the whole drilling plan so they can look for the weak links. In addition to that, our commission recommended a number of efforts that would require legislation by our Congress to restructure our federal regulatory agency to make it more capable of managing this activity and regulating, preventing future risks, as well as increasing, for example, the liability limits.
These kind of accidents are going to occur in the future. The result of this incident should be a much better effort by the industry itself and by the governments that regulate it to try to assure that they have on hand both the capability to deal with a major blowout in deep water and the ability to deal with the economic and environmental effects once something like that occurs.
The biggest lesson for other nations to avoid this sort of catastrophe would be to have regulations in place that require very specific and very detailed emergency response plans. And not only make sure that those emergency response plans are in place and are suitable to the location, but that they're enforced.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Obrigada.
Obrigado.